My father sold me for a handful of silver and a promise to settle his debts. He didn't even look at me when he said it. His eyes were fixed on the stranger standing by our door, a man built as solid as the Montana mountains that loomed behind him. Thunder rattled the windows of the boarding house, the sound of my future collapsing. The year was 1879, and at 22 I was already an old maid, a burden my father never missed a chance to remind me of. "This here's Josiah Reed," my father grunted, his voice thick with greed. "Owns the biggest spread in the territory. He needs a wife." The stranger, Josiah Reed, had eyes the color of a winter sky and silver threaded through his dark hair. He didn't look at me like the other men did, with that quick, dismissive glance that catalogued my size and found me wanting. He just looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. "You'll marry him," my father declared. The words were a sentence, not a proposal. "Someone's got to cook his meals and warm his bed. At least this way, you'll earn your keep." The shame was a hot poker in my gut. He said it right there in front of him, laying my humiliation bare on the worn floorboards. I was livestock, a piece of property to be traded. Josiah Reed shifted his weight, the leather of his coat creaking in the suffocating silence. "Perhaps Miss Caldwell and I could speak alone," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. My father scoffed. "Whatever you got to say, you can say to me. It's my decision." But the rancher's gaze never left my face. "This concerns the lady," he insisted. Something in his tone made my father step back, muttering under his breath. Out on the porch, the wind was a wild thing, whipping my hair across my face. I braced myself for the final inspection, the cruel assessment. Instead, Josiah Reed just stood there, watching the storm gather over the mountains. "This is not a love match, Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice direct, honest. "But you will be treated with kindness. You will have a home, and you will never go hungry. I give you my word." The question tumbled out before I could stop it. "Why me?" A shadow passed over his weathered face, a flicker of some old, deep pain. "Maybe," he said slowly. "We both have reasons for wanting a life without complications." Behind us, through the thin walls, I could hear my father humming, already spending the money in his head. I had a choice. Stay and be my father's forgotten furniture, or go and be this stranger's wife. Winter was coming, and I was standing in the wind with nowhere else to go. But as I looked into Josiah Reed's lonely eyes, I saw the same ache that lived in my own heart. And I had to wonder what kind of complications he was running from. The wedding was a gray, hurried affair 3 weeks later. The church was empty save for the preacher, whose words floated around us like dust motes in the cold air. I wore my mother's old dress, the seams let out as far as they would go. My father didn't even stay to see us leave. He just took Josiah's money and turned his back. The journey to Silver Creek Ranch was made in silence. The wagon wheels ground against the dirt road, each turn taking me further from the only life I'd ever known. This was it. The great, terrifying unknown. Josiah didn't push me to talk. He just handled the horses with a quiet competence, his large hands gentle on the reins. He pointed out landmarks, the sleeping giant mountain range, the curve of the Yellowstone River in the distance. When we stopped to rest the horses, he shared his food without comment. No cruel jokes about my appetite. No disgusted looks. He just handed me a biscuit and poured me a cup of coffee from his thermos. It was the kindest thing a man had done for me in years. "Were you married before?" I asked, my voice small against the vastness of the prairie. His jaw tightened, just for a second. "Once," he said. The word was heavy with a history I couldn't see. "She died 3 years ago." He didn't say more, but he didn't have to. The grief was there in the lines around his eyes, in the way he stared at the horizon. I was marrying a man still in love with a ghost. We were two strangers, bound together by loneliness. As the afternoon sun began to dip low, the ranch came into view. It took my breath away. Nestled in a green valley, a 2-story house stood proud and strong, with a wide porch and a clear, bubbling creek running past the front yard. It was a paradise, a picture from a book. "I built it myself," Josiah said, a flicker of pride in his voice, board by board. But inside, the dream curdled. The house wasn't just a house, it was a shrine. Delicate china sat in glass cabinets. A well-worn cookbook lay open on the kitchen counter. And on the mantelpiece, watching over the entire room, was a small painted portrait of a woman with golden hair and a smile like an angel. She was beautiful. Perfect. Everything I was not. "Her name was Catherine," Josiah said from behind me, his voice barely a whisper. That night, he showed me to a guest room upstairs. "You'll be more comfortable here," he said, and the space he put between us was more than just a flight of stairs. Lying alone in the cold, strange bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his heavy footsteps moving around downstairs. I was a ghost in a house already haunted by another. How could I ever build a life here? How could anyone compete with the memory of a saint? Morning came, and with it our first test. I was in the kitchen, trying to make sense of Catherine's perfectly organized pantry, when I saw them through the window. 3 riders, coming up the long drive. Josiah emerged from the barn, and his whole body went rigid. He didn't look like a rancher anymore. He looked like a soldier bracing for a fight. The lead rider was a tall man with a cruel smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. "Morning, Reed," he called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "Heard you finally bought yourself another wife." Josiah's hand drifted down, resting near the pistol on his hip. "What do you want, Garrett?" The man named Garrett tipped his hat in a mocking gesture. His eyes found me in the window, and his grin widened. "Just paying a neighborly visit. Wouldn't want the new missus to think we're unfriendly out here." His gaze lingered, making my skin crawl. "Though I have to say, Reed, I'm surprised. After what happened to Catherine, I figured you'd have lost your taste for wives." The words were a slap, a public shaming. I saw Josiah flinch, a tremor of pain running through his powerful frame. "Get off my land," Josiah said, his voice dangerously low. Garrett just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the morning air. He turned his horse but paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Sure, Reed, for now. But you and me both know, some secrets don't stay buried forever. And this valley has a long memory." The 3 of them rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a poison in the air. I looked at my new husband, a man I barely knew, and I saw the terror in his eyes. The ghost of Catherine wasn't just a memory, it was a threat, and it was already here. Weeks bled into a month, and the silence in that house grew into its own living thing. Josiah worked from before sunrise until long after I went to bed, building fences, tending cattle, doing anything to stay out of the house. He was running from the ghost, and by extension, he was running from me. I tried to make the house my own, in small ways. I moved a vase of dried flowers from the parlor to the kitchen table. The next morning, it was back in the parlor. I put a new, warmer blanket on the sofa. The next day, Catherine's old, delicate throw was folded neatly in its place. He never said a word. He just erased my presence, piece by piece, restoring the shrine. I was an intruder, a trespasser in his temple of grief. He spoke more to his horses than he did to me. The loneliness was a physical weight, pressing down on me until it was hard to breathe. One night, I couldn't sleep. A storm was rolling in, the same kind of angry, booming storm that had been raging the day he came for me. I crept downstairs for a drink of water and heard his voice from the parlor. He was talking. My heart leaped for a moment, thinking maybe, finally, he wanted to speak to me. I pushed the door open a crack and peered inside. He was standing in front of the fireplace, his back to me, staring up at Catherine's portrait. "I'm sorry, Catherine," he whispered to the painting, his voice thick with a pain so raw it made my own chest ache. "I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have protected you." My blood ran cold. Protected her from what? He had told me she died in an accident, a riding accident during a storm just like this one. But his words, they sounded like a confession. The doubt, a tiny seed planted by Garrett's threats, began to sprout in the darkness of my mind. What if Catherine's death wasn't an accident? What if this good, quiet man I was married to was hiding a terrible secret beneath his grief? Every day after that, I watched him. I studied the way his hands would clench when Garrett's name was mentioned in town. The way his eyes would go distant and haunted whenever a thunderstorm rolled across the valley. I was living under the same roof as a man whose heart was a locked room, and I was starting to become terrified of what was behind the door. I was a prisoner of his past, and I didn't even know the nature of his crime. The winter snows came, blanketing the ranch in a deep, suffocating white. We were trapped, alone together. The isolation frayed my nerves raw. I had to know. I had to understand what I had married into. One evening, I found the courage. He was cleaning his rifle by the fire, the light glinting off the polished steel. "Josiah," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Garrett said. He said the valley has a long memory. What did he mean? What really happened to Catherine?" He stopped what he was doing. He didn't look at me. He just stared into the fire, his face a mask of stone. "It was an accident," he said, each word clipped and final. "Lightning spooked her horse. She fell. That's the end of the story." But I could see the lie in the rigid set of his shoulders. It wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even the beginning. And I was trapped in the middle of it, married to a man who might be a monster. The fear was constant now, a low hum beneath the surface of our silent, lonely days. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob. Because the ghost of Catherine was no longer the most frightening thing in that house. It was my husband. The morning the riders came, the world was white and silent. Snow had fallen all night, and the ranch was buried under a pristine blanket of it. The beauty of it was a lie. I was standing at the kitchen window, watching the sun glint off the untouched drifts, when I saw the dark shapes moving in the distance. 4 of them. Moving fast. A knot of pure dread tightened in my stomach. These weren't friendly visitors. Josiah saw them too from the barn. He came running toward the house, his face grim. "Get inside," he yelled. "Lock the door." I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the heavy oak door and threw the bolt just as they thundered into the yard, their horses kicking up sprays of snow. They weren't wearing masks, which was somehow even more terrifying. The leader was a man I recognized from town, a gambler named Tom Bradley whose face was a roadmap of bad decisions. "Reed!" he bellowed, his voice ugly in the clean morning air. "Get out here! We know you're in there!" Josiah stepped out onto the porch, a rifle held loosely in his hands. He looked calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "What's your business here, Bradley?" "My business is with your wife," Bradley sneered, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice into the snow. "She owes a man in town $500. My heart stopped beating. It was impossible. I'd never borrowed a penny in my life. I'd never even spoken to Tom Bradley. "You're mistaken," Josiah said, his voice flat and even. "My wife doesn't have any debts." Bradley laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, yeah? Tell that to this." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and held it up. "Promissory note, signed by one Mercy Reed. Her signature's right here. $500 due last week." He spurred his horse closer, tossing the paper onto the porch. Josiah bent down and picked it up. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the page. I watched his face, praying he would see the lie, that he would know it was a trick. But then he looked up, and his gaze met mine through the window. And in his winter blue eyes, I saw it. Doubt. A flicker of uncertainty that broke my heart in two. He didn't know if he could trust me. After all these weeks of silence and suspicion, the fragile thread connecting us had finally snapped. "Josiah, I swear," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. "It's not true." Bradley saw the look on Josiah's face, and his grin widened. "The owner wants his money, Reed, by sunset, or we'll take it out of your hide. And maybe we'll take the woman as a down payment." The threat hung in the frozen air, ugly and real. They were going to kill him. And it was my name on that paper. Someone had weaponized my identity, forged my past, and now they were using it to destroy my future. Josiah stood there on the porch, holding the lie in his hand, and he had to choose. Believe the stranger he married, or believe the black ink on the page. The riders turned and galloped away, their laughter echoing across the snow-covered valley. Josiah didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the paper, a man completely and utterly alone. And so was I. He came inside, the cold air clinging to him. He didn't look at me. He just walked to the fireplace and threw the promissory note into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and disappeared. "Did you sign it?" he asked the fire, his voice devoid of all emotion. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "I swear on my mother's grave, Josiah. I have never been in a saloon. I have never gambled. Someone is lying." He was silent for a long time, watching the last embers of the note fade away. I could feel the wall between us, thick and high as a mountain. He was weighing my word against the evidence, against the weeks of my quiet, unknown presence in his house. "They'll be back at sunset," he said finally, still not looking at me. $500 is more than we have." "We could sell some cattle," I suggested, desperate. "No one's buying in this weather, not at a fair price." He finally turned, and the look on his face terrified me. It was a look of complete defeat. "There's another way," he said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I could leave, just ride out. They can't collect from a man they can't find." The words were a physical blow. He would abandon his home, the ranch he built with his own hands, the shrine to his dead wife. "You would run?" I asked, incredulous. "And let them take everything?" "Better than letting them take my life," he said. But his hands were trembling. He was a man being pushed to the edge, and I realized with a sickening lurch that this was about more than just money. This was connected to Garrett, to Catherine. It was a tightening net, and we were caught in it. Seeing him so broken, so willing to give up, something inside me snapped. I had been sold, shamed, ignored, and suspected. I had lived like a mouse in this house, tiptoeing around a ghost and a grieving man. No more. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "We are not running. I am not running. This is my home now, too, and I will not be chased out of it by a lie." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, as if for the first time. He saw not the plain, burdensome woman his father-in-law had sold him, but someone else. Someone with fire in her eyes. I didn't wait for his permission. I went to the stable, saddled the calmest mare, and put on my heaviest coat. "Where are you going?" he asked, following me out into the biting cold. "To town," I said, swinging myself up into the saddle. "I'm going to find out who is trying to destroy us, and I'm going to make them pay." His eyes searched my face, a storm of confusion and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "It's dangerous, Mercy." It was the first time he had used my name. "So is staying here and waiting to die," I replied. I turned the horse and kicked her into a gallop, leaving him standing there in the snow. The ride to Cedar Ridge was a blur of wind and fear and a cold, hard anger that burned all the way to my bones. I was done being a victim. I was done being a ghost. Whoever did this to me, to us, was about to find out what Mercy Caldwell was really made of. Cedar Ridge was huddled under a gray sky, smoke curling from chimneys into the frozen air. I rode straight down Main Street to the ugliest building in town, Murphy's Saloon. The place squatted on the corner like a fat, dirty toad. I had never set foot in such an establishment, but I swung off my horse and pushed through the swinging doors without a second's hesitation. The smell hit me first. Stale beer, sweat, and despair. A dozen men stopped their conversations to stare at me, their eyes crawling over my winter clothes. A woman in a saloon in the middle of the day was a spectacle. A large, angry-looking woman was even better. "I'm looking for Murphy," I announced to the room, my voice louder than I intended. A short, stout man with hands like shovels and a face like a crumpled map wiped the bar with a filthy rag. "You found him," he grunted. "What do you want?" "I want to know why you sent men to my ranch to collect on a debt I don't owe," I said, walking right up to the bar. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Lady, your signature is in my ledger. Says you owe me $500. You got a gambling problem. That's your business. Paying your debts, that's my business." He pulled a thick ledger from under the bar and slammed it down, flipping it open. There it was again. My name, Mercy Reed. The handwriting was perfect, a flawless imitation. It was so good, it had to be someone who knew me, someone who had seen my signature before. "This is a forgery," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Prove it," Murphy said with a smirk that showed off a row of yellow teeth. "Bring me the money by sunset, or Tom Bradley and the boys will be back to collect, and they won't be as polite next time." "I think you've said enough, Thomas." The voice came from the back room. It was a woman's voice. Sweet as sugar, cold as ice. A woman stepped out of the shadows, and my world tilted on its axis. She was beautiful, dressed in a silk gown that must have cost a fortune. But I wasn't looking at the dress. I was looking at her face. A face I hadn't seen in 2 years. A face I had prayed I would never see again. "Hello, Mercy," she said, her smile a slash of red lipstick in her pale face. "Fancy meeting you here. Elizabeth Morrison, the daughter of my father's disgraced former business partner. A girl who had been my closest friend until she was caught stealing from the church collection box and run out of town." "Elizabeth," I breathed. "It's Mrs. Murphy now," she corrected, gliding over to stand beside her husband. She looped her arm through his. "Thomas and I own this fine establishment, and it seems we are your new creditors." It all crashed into place. Elizabeth had stayed at our boarding house dozens of times. She had seen me sign the guest register. She knew my handwriting. She knew my history. She knew exactly how to hurt me. "Why?" I whispered, the single word encompassing years of betrayal. Her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "Why? Because you have everything that should have been mine, a rich husband, the biggest ranch in the territory, respect, while I was cast out, forced to marry a saloon keeper just to survive." Her eyes swept around the dingy room with disgust. "But that's all about to change. Tonight, my dear Mercy, your perfect life burns to the ground." A chill colder than the winter air snaked down my spine. "You're not just after money," I said. "You want Josiah dead." "Accidents happen," Murphy chimed in with a shrug. "Especially to ranchers who can't pay what they owe." Elizabeth leaned across the bar, her perfume thick and cloying. "But," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I'm feeling generous. I'll make you a deal." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What deal?" "I don't really want your husband dead," she purred. "I just want him, and the ranch. So here's the choice. You pack a bag, you get on your horse, and you disappear. You ride out of this territory and never come back. If you do that, the debt vanishes. Josiah lives." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But if you stay, if you're still on that ranch when the sun goes down, my husband's friends will make a widow out of you." The church bell outside began to toll the noon hour. I had a few hours to decide. Save the man I married by abandoning him forever, or stay and watch him die because of a lie spun by the girl who was once my friend. The ride back to the ranch was a frantic race against the setting sun. Every hoofbeat pounded out the rhythm of my impossible choice: Josiah's life or our life together. Elizabeth's words echoed in my head. "He dies tonight." When I galloped into the yard, Josiah was waiting on the porch. He had seen the desperation in my face as I rode in. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight. I tumbled out of the saddle, my legs weak. "It was Elizabeth," I gasped, the words spilling out of me. "Elizabeth Morrison. She's married to Murphy. She forged the note. She hates me. She wants the ranch. She wants you." I told him everything. The vendetta, the jealousy, the horrifying ultimatum. When I finished, I looked up at him, expecting to see anger or blame. Instead, I saw a strange new light in his eyes, a fire I hadn't seen before. "She told you to run," he said, his voice a low growl. "She told you to abandon me." "She said if I don't, they'll kill you at sunset," I whispered, tears finally streaming down my cold cheeks. He stepped forward and did something he had never done before. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from my face with his thumb. His touch was warm and steady. "You came back," he said, his voice full of a quiet wonder. "She gave you a way out, and you came back to me." "This is my home," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You are my husband." In that moment, something shifted between us. The wall of grief and suspicion crumbled. We weren't just two strangers in an arrangement anymore. We were partners, a team, and our enemy was at the gate. "They want to fight," Josiah said, his jaw set, his eyes hard as flint. "We'll give them one." A surge of adrenaline shot through me, chasing away the fear. We weren't going to run. We weren't going to surrender. We were going to stand our ground. The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. We barricaded the doors with heavy furniture. We pulled the thick shutters closed over the windows, leaving only small slits to see through. Josiah brought out his collection of firearms, rifles, shotguns, pistols, and laid them out on the kitchen table. He showed me how to load and fire each one, his instructions calm and precise. As he handed me a heavy Winchester rifle, our hands brushed. A current passed between us, a silent understanding. We were in this together, until the end. As the sun began its slow, cruel descent toward the mountains, painting the snow outside in shades of orange and blood red, we took our positions. Josiah took the front parlor. I took the kitchen window that overlooked the drive. The house was dark and silent. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. The waiting was the worst part. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. The world outside grew dark. The last sliver of sun vanished behind the peaks. It was sunset, and then we heard it. The sound of approaching horses. Not just a few. A lot of them. They weren't just coming to collect a debt. They were coming for a war. They came out of the twilight like demons, a dozen riders surrounding the house. Tom Bradley was in the lead, his face lit by the torch he carried. "Reed!" he roared. "Time's up! Send out the woman and we'll let you live!" "Go to hell!" Josiah's voice boomed from the parlor window. The first gunshot was the signal. All at once, the night exploded in a symphony of violence. Gunfire erupted from all sides, bullets thudding into the thick log walls of the house. Glass shattered as a shot found one of the few uncovered panes in an upstairs window. I crouched below the kitchen window, the Winchester rifle feeling heavy and alien in my hands. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. This was real. This was happening. "Mercy, are you all right?" Josiah yelled from the other room. "I'm fine," I yelled back, my voice tight with fear. I peeked through the slit in the shutter. A man was trying to get to the barn, probably to set it on fire. I lifted the rifle, rested the barrel on the sill, took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. The kick of the gun slammed against my shoulder, and the boom was deafening in the enclosed space. The man in the yard screamed and fell, clutching his leg. I had shot someone. A wave of nausea washed over me, but I pushed it down. This was survival. From the parlor, Josiah's rifle cracked again and again, a steady, deadly rhythm. He was a good shot. 2 more of Bradley's men were down, but there were still too many. They were using the fences and the water trough for cover, pinning us down. A torch arced through the air and landed on the porch roof. Flames began to lick at the dry shingles. We were trapped. "They're trying to burn us out," I shouted. "I see it," he shouted back. Suddenly, the gunfire from outside intensified, but it sounded different. Confused. There were new shouts, cries of surprise and pain from Bradley's men. What was happening? I peered through the slit again and saw something that made no sense. More riders had arrived. They had come up silently from the creek bed, and they were attacking Bradley's men from behind. A full-on battle was raging in our front yard. The leader of the new group was a large man on a powerful black horse, firing a pistol in each hand with terrifying accuracy. As he turned in the flickering light of the burning porch, I saw his face. It was Garrett, our hateful, menacing neighbor. The man who had threatened Josiah. He was saving us. I was so stunned I couldn't move. Why? Why would he help us? Bradley's gang, caught between two fires, broke and ran. They scattered into the darkness like frightened coyotes, leaving their wounded behind. The sudden silence was as shocking as the noise had been. The only sound was the crackle of the fire on the porch roof. Josiah and I rushed outside with buckets of water from the kitchen pump, and together with two of Garrett's men, we managed to douse the flames before they could spread. The porch was charred and smoking, but the house was safe. Garrett dismounted and walked toward us, his face grim in the moonlight. He wasn't smiling. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like an executioner. "You two all right?" he asked, his voice flat. "Thanks to you," Josiah said, his tone wary. He didn't trust this any more than I did. "Why did you help us?" Garrett ignored the question. He surveyed the scene, the wounded men groaning on the ground, the smoking porch, the bullet-pocked walls of our home. "Quite a disturbance you've caused, Reed," he said. He wasn't talking to Josiah as a neighbor. He was talking to him as something else. And then I saw the silver star pinned to his coat, glinting in the moonlight. Sheriff Garrett. He was the law in this valley. "Just defending our home," Josiah said, his hand still gripping his rifle. Garrett's eyes narrowed. He took a slow step forward. "That's one way to look at it. Another way is that a known murderer used a dispute over a gambling debt to stage a violent gunfight, creating a public menace." My blood ran cold. Known murderer? He was talking about Josiah. "I appreciate you bringing this situation to a head, Mercy," Garrett said, turning his cold eyes on me. His voice was smooth as poison. "Your little trip to the saloon today made a lot of noise. Gave me all the witnesses I needed to justify what comes next." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. It wasn't a promissory note. It was a warrant. "Josiah Reed," Sheriff Garrett announced, his voice ringing out in the cold, clear night. "I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of your first wife, Catherine Reed. The world stopped spinning. The gunfight, the debt. Elizabeth. It was all a lie, a performance, a brilliantly orchestrated trap designed by the sheriff himself to frame an innocent man. And I had walked right into the middle of it. Two of his deputies grabbed Josiah, wrenching the rifle from his hands. He didn't resist. He just looked at me, his face a mask of utter betrayal and despair. They had used me to spring their trap, and I had led them right to him. They dragged him away in chains, his silhouette disappearing into the darkness. I was left standing in the snow, surrounded by the wreckage of our home and the smoking ruins of my life. Sheriff Garrett mounted his horse, pausing to look down at me. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We'll take good care of your husband. Murderers get what they deserve in this territory." He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving me alone in the deafening silence. The wife of an accused killer, the town fool, the pawn in a game I never knew I was playing. The next few days were a living nightmare. News traveled fast. Josiah Reed, the quiet, respected rancher, was a monster who had killed his perfect wife 3 years ago, and had finally been brought to justice. The story of my gambling debt and the subsequent shootout was told as proof of my degenerate character, the perfect match for a murderer. I was a pariah. When I rode into town for supplies, people crossed the street to avoid me. Shopkeepers who had been polite just days before now refused my business. The Hendersons, the good neighbors Josiah had told me about, locked their door when they saw me coming up their lane. I was utterly, completely alone. I tried to visit Josiah in the jail, a tiny, foul-smelling stone building behind the sheriff's office. Garrett met me at the door with a smug smile. "Sorry, Mrs. Reed. No visitors for the prisoner. He's too dangerous." I returned to the ranch, but it was no longer a home. It was a cold, empty prison. The silence I had once found so lonely was now filled with accusations. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sounded like whispers. Murderer. Fool. I would stare at Catherine's portrait for hours, trying to understand. What had happened in this house? What secrets were these walls keeping? I slept with a pistol on my nightstand, not because I feared attackers from the outside, but because I feared the crushing despair that was closing in on me. It would be so easy to give up, to pack my bags and ride away, just as Elizabeth had wanted, to disappear and let this whole nightmare swallow Josiah whole. But then I would see his face as they led him away. The shock. The betrayal. He had finally started to trust me, and I had led his worst enemy to his door. I couldn't run. I owed him. I owed him the truth. My despair, slowly, painfully, began to curdle into a hard, cold rage. Garrett had outsmarted me. He had used my history with Elizabeth, my fear, my determination, and twisted it all to serve his own purpose. He thought I was a weak, foolish woman he could easily manipulate. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I had nothing left to lose. My reputation was destroyed. My husband was in jail. My home felt like a tomb. All I had left was the truth, and I would tear this valley apart to find it. I went to Catherine's room. The room Josiah had always kept locked. The door was solid oak. I took a deep breath and kicked it, again and again, throwing my entire body against it until the wood splintered and the lock gave way with a sickening crack. The room was just as he had left it 3 years ago. A thick layer of dust covered everything. It was a perfect sanctuary, a moment frozen in time. The air was thick with the faint scent of rosewater and secrets. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the answer to everything was in this room. The room was a time capsule of a dead woman's life. A silver-backed brush sat on the dresser, a few strands of golden hair still tangled in its bristles. A book of poetry lay on the nightstand, a ribbon marking a page. On the wall hung a sampler she had stitched. Love conquers all. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I started my search methodically, like a detective at a crime scene. I went through the drawers of the dresser, finding neatly folded silk underthings and sachets of dried lavender. I searched the wardrobe, pushing aside beautiful dresses that smelled faintly of Catherine. I looked under the bed, behind the furniture. Nothing. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows into the dusty room. I was beginning to think I was wrong. Maybe there was no secret here. Maybe Josiah really was a killer, and I was the biggest fool in Montana. Frustrated and exhausted, I sank down onto the floor, my back against the bed. My hand rested on the thick bearskin rug that covered the center of the room, and my fingers brushed against something hard. An edge. I pulled the heavy rug back. The floorboards were old and dark, but one of them looked different. The seams around it were too clean. There was no dust. My heart started to pound. I used my fingertips to pry at the edge. It was loose. I lifted it up. Beneath it was a small, dark cavity. And nestled inside that cavity was a small, leather-bound box with a tarnished brass lock. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. I didn't have a key. I ran downstairs and grabbed the fireplace poker, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it. Back in the room, I jammed the tip of the poker into the lock and twisted with all my strength. The metal shrieked and bent, but the old lock held. I raised the poker and brought it down on the box again and again, smashing it with a fury born of desperation. Wood splintered. The brass hinge snapped. The lid fell away. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a stack of letters tied with a simple red ribbon. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, masculine. "My dearest Catherine," it began. "The hours we spend together are the only moments I feel alive. To be with you, away from the prying eyes of this town, is my only joy. I count the minutes until I can hold you again." It was a love letter. A passionate, secret love letter. And it wasn't from Josiah. I scanned to the bottom of the page. "Forever yours, G.G." My blood turned to ice in my veins. Garrett. Sheriff Garrett. I tore through the rest of the letters, my mind reeling. There were dozens of them. A secret, torrid affair, laid bare in black ink. They wrote of secret meeting spots, of stolen kisses, of their plans to run away together. Catherine was not the saint everyone thought she was. She was a woman in love with another man, cheating on the husband who worshipped her. Then I reached the last letter. This one was different. The handwriting was Catherine's. It was a draft, crossed out and rewritten in several places. It was dated the day she died. "My dearest G," it read, "I cannot do this. I cannot leave him. Josiah is a good man, a kind man, and he does not deserve this betrayal. What we have done is a terrible sin, and it must end. I am going back to my husband. I will try to be the wife he deserves. Do not try to find me. Do not contact me again. This is goodbye." It wasn't a love letter. It was a rejection. She was ending the affair. On the day she died, Catherine wasn't running away with Garrett. She was running away from him. And he had let the whole world believe that the man she chose, the man she went back to, was her killer. The truth was not a weapon. It was a bomb. And I was about to light the fuse. The trial of Josiah Reed was the biggest event Cedar Ridge had ever seen. The small courthouse was packed to the rafters. People had come from 3 counties away to see the monster of Silver Creek get his justice. I sat in the front row, clutching the bundle of letters inside my coat. I felt the hate from the people around me, a physical force. They saw me as the murderer's whore, the trashy woman who had replaced their sainted Catherine. Let them stare. Sheriff Garrett was the star witness for the prosecution. He took the stand, looking solemn and heroic. He told a masterful story, weaving a tale of a jealous, possessive Josiah, a man who flew into a rage when he discovered his wife was unhappy. He couldn't stand the thought of her leaving him, Garrett said, his voice ringing with false emotion. So he followed her that day. He caught up to her in the storm and he killed her. He made it look like an accident. For 3 years, he got away with it. But his guilt made him careless. He brought this new woman to his ranch, a woman of low character, and his violent nature finally resurfaced. He was painting a masterpiece of lies, and the jury was drinking in every word. Josiah sat at the defendant's table, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man already condemned. Finally, the prosecutor rested his case. "The defense calls Mercy Reed to the stand," my husband's court-appointed lawyer said, his voice full of reluctance. He thought I was a liability. The crowd murmured as I walked to the stand. I could feel Garrett's eyes on me, a confident, smug smirk playing on his lips. He thought I was going to cry or make a fool of myself. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore the oath, my voice clear and steady. The defense lawyer asked me a few simple questions, which I answered calmly. Then it was the prosecutor's turn. "Mrs. Reed," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "is it true you have a $500 gambling debt?" "No, sir," I replied. "It is not. Is it true that your husband engaged in a violent shootout at your ranch over this supposed debt?" "A group of men attacked our home, and we defended ourselves," I said. He was about to ask another question, but I held up my hand. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at the judge, "I have evidence that pertains to the murder of Catherine Reed. Evidence that Sheriff Garrett has conveniently overlooked." A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. The judge looked intrigued. "What is this evidence, Mrs. Reed?" I pulled the letters from my coat and placed them on the ledge in front of me. "These are letters, Your Honor. Letters written by Catherine Reed and her secret lover." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Josiah looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Garrett had gone completely still, his face turning the color of ash. "A lover?" the judge asked. "Who was this man?" I looked directly at the sheriff's table. "A man who signed his letters with the initial G," I said, my voice ringing out like a bell. "A man named Garrett." I began to read. I read the passionate declarations of love. I read the plans to run away. The crowd was in an uproar. People were standing up, shouting. The judge hammered his gavel for order. Then I picked up the last letter, Catherine's letter, and in the dead silence of that courtroom, I read her final words aloud. Her rejection of Garrett, her decision to go back to Josiah, her final goodbye. When I finished, you could have heard a pin drop. All eyes were on Sheriff Garrett. He was shaking, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. "Lies!" he screamed, jumping to his feet. "They're forgeries! She loved me! She was leaving him for me!" He was unraveling, right there in front of everyone. In his panic, the truth came spilling out. "She was meeting me that night," he confessed, his voice cracking, "to tell me we were running away together. But the storm, the horse spooked. It was an accident. A tragic accident. She never should have been out there. If she had just stayed with me—" He trailed off, realizing what he had said. He had just admitted to being there, to being the reason she was out in that storm. He had confessed to the lie that had condemned an innocent man. The judge's gavel fell, not for order, but like a final judgment. "Sheriff Garrett," he boomed, "I am placing you under arrest for perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Deputies who had served under him just moments before moved in, their faces grim, and took him into custody. The great hero of Cedar Ridge was a fraud, and the truth had finally, explosively, set us free. Josiah walked out of the courthouse a free man, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, as if waking from a long, terrible dream. The crowd that had been so hostile just an hour before now parted for him, their faces a mixture of shame and awe. They looked at me differently, too, not as a harlot, but as a warrior. I waited for him at the bottom of the steps. He walked toward me, his eyes never leaving my face. The prison pallor was already gone, replaced by a look of profound gratitude. He stopped in front of me, and for a long moment, we just stood there, the whole town watching. "You could have run," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Garrett offered you a way out of all this." "So did Elizabeth," I replied softly. "Running's not my style." "You saved my life, Mercy," he said. I reached out and took his hand. His calloused fingers wrapped around mine. We saved each other. He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face. A slow smile spread across his lips, the first real smile I had ever seen from him. It transformed his entire face, chasing away the ghosts and the grief. It was the smile of a man who had been given a second chance at life. "Let's go home," he said. And this time, when he said the word home, I knew he meant it. We rode back to Silver Creek Ranch, side by side. The world seemed brand new, the colors sharper, the air cleaner. When we arrived, the ranch didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like ours. That evening, as the sun set, painting the mountains in hues of gold and purple, Josiah took down Catherine's portrait from the mantelpiece. He didn't smash it or burn it. He just wrapped it carefully in a blanket. "It's time to put the past away," he said, looking at me. "She was a part of my life, and I will mourn her, but she is not my future." He stored the portrait and all of Catherine's other things in a trunk in the attic. Together we closed the lid, burying the last of the ghosts. We stood on the porch, the one I had helped save from the fire, and looked out at our land, our future. "I married you for convenience, Mercy," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I married you because I was lonely and broken, and I thought a wife was something I needed to own. I was wrong." He turned to face me, taking both of my hands in his. "You are not something I own. You are my partner, my defender, the bravest woman I have ever known." He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't the chaste, awkward kiss from our wedding day. It was a kiss full of promise, of gratitude, of a love that had been forged in the hottest fire imaginable. It wasn't a fairy tale love built on beauty or perfection. It was real. It was a love built on seeing the true worth of a person when the rest of the world had cast them aside. It was a love built on fighting for each other when all hope was lost. As the first stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, I knew I had found something far more precious than a husband or a home. I had found a love that was stronger than lies, tougher than hardship, and truer than any secret. And it was just the beginning. If you believe that true strength is found in the fight for justice and that real love can overcome any lie, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.